You know, national energy security, it's this invisible force, right? It's what keeps our lights on, what powers our industries, and really what fuels an entire economy. But what happens when a country's main fuel source just starts to run out? Okay, let's dive right into that.
So this wasn't just some theoretical question. This was the exact problem staring Pakistan right in the face in the early 2010s. I mean, think about it. You've got 240 million people, your own natural gas fields are running low, but demand is just going through the roof. The answer? Well, it wasn't going to be found underground. They had to think way, way outside the box and beyond their own borders.
And what they came up with was this, a virtual pipeline across the ocean. Seriously, it's a brilliant concept when you think about it. You're basically taking natural gas, turning it into a commodity you can ship anywhere on the planet, and in doing so, you've created this flexible, floating lifeline for your entire country.
Okay, so to really appreciate just how big a deal this solution was, we've got to understand the sheer scale of the problem they were facing. And this wasn't something that happened overnight. Nope, this was a crisis that had been brewing for years.
So you look back at the start of the 2010s, and you can see this huge gap opening up between supply and demand. By 2012, there was just no denying it. The domestic gas fields were in serious decline. And then boom, just 3 years later, the country is hit with these severe, absolutely crippling shortages. The clock was ticking, big time.
And the result of all this was something they called gas load shedding. This basically meant scheduled shutdowns of the gas supply. We're talking factories, businesses, just having their power cut. And let me tell you, this wasn't just some minor inconvenience. It was a direct threat to the country's entire economic backbone.
So, faced with this massive challenge, the government knew they needed a solution that was fast, that could scale up, and above all, that was reliable. And they found their answer out on the global energy market.
The key to the whole thing? Liquefied natural gas, or what everyone calls LNG. And the science here is pretty wild. You take natural gas and cool it down to a crazy minus 162 degrees Celsius. When you do that, it shrinks in volume by more than 600 times. It turns into a liquid that you can then safely pour into these massive ships and send across the ocean. Now, you can't just start buying this stuff on a whim. To manage this huge new operation, a special company was created, Pakistan LNG Limited, or PLL. Their one and only job was to be Pakistan's official buyer on the world stage, navigating those tricky international markets to get their hands on this absolutely vital fuel. All right, so how does this virtual pipeline actually work in practice? It's basically a four-step journey. First, PLL goes out and finds and buys the LNG from suppliers all over the globe. Step 2, that liquid gas gets shipped to Pakistan on those giant carriers. Third, when it arrives at Port Qasim, it's carefully warmed back up into a gas. They call it regasification. And then, for the final step, it's injected right into Pakistan's own massive national pipeline network. We're talking 170,000 kilometers of pipeline.
But, buying LNG isn't like picking up groceries. It's way more complicated than just buying fuel. PLL had to become this really sophisticated player on the world stage, kind of like a strategic hunter for energy.
To pull this off, PLL came up with a pretty smart two-part strategy. On one side, they lock in these long-term contracts. Think of it like signing a 10 or 15-year lease on an apartment. It gives you price stability, and you know your supply is secure. But then on the other side, they also buy on what's called the spot market. This is more like snagging a last-minute deal on a plane ticket. It lets them jump on good prices when the market dips.
And to make all this happen, they had to build relationships with some of the biggest players in the energy game. We're talking about huge commodity traders in places like Singapore and Switzerland, all the way to state-owned giants like Qatar Energy. PLL's contact list really did become a who's who of the global energy world.
All right, so after all that effort, what was the result? Well, the impact was huge, and it was immediate. But, as you can imagine, the journey wasn't exactly smooth sailing the whole time.
And this right here, this chart shows you just how high the stakes were. Pakistan's economy literally runs on gas. It makes up a full 50% of the country's entire energy mix. So when your own domestic supply is drawing up, that means half of your power, has to come from somewhere else. That is a massive, massive risk you have to manage.
So here's the bottom line, the really crucial point. The fuel that PLL's imports help bring in, that fuel generates over 40% of the entire country's electricity.
Just let that sink in for a second. That means almost every other light bulb that turns on in Pakistan is powered, at least in part, by this virtual pipeline. But of course, when you rely on global markets, you're also exposed to global risks. And boy, did that become clear in 2022. The international energy crisis hit, and LNG prices just skyrocketed to insane historic highs. It was a major stress test for PLL's entire strategy. And during that crisis, some international suppliers actually bailed on their contracts with Pakistan. Why? So they could turn around and sell that same gas on the open market for a much higher profit. This obviously created temporary shortages, and it forced PLT to get even smarter, even more agile, and to diversify where they were getting their gas from. So, all of this brings us to today, to the legacy of PLL and the absolutely critical role it's still playing in shaping Pakistan's energy future.
I think this quote just sums it up perfectly. By creating this virtual pipeline, PLL completely changed the game for Pakistan's energy. The country's future was suddenly decoupled, as it says, from the luck of what it could find buried under its own ground.
And you really do feel that impact every single day. PLL's imports are now a cornerstone of Pakistan's industrial economy. They provide that essential fuel that keeps the lights on and the machines running in the country's huge textile and fertilizer sectors. We're talking about major drivers of the national economy. And this leaves us with one last, really big question for the future. This incredible virtual pipeline, it was built for natural gas, right? But as the whole world starts shifting towards cleaner energy, you have to wonder, can this same model, this global, flexible supply chain, be adapted for a green energy future? Can it work for hydrogen or something else? That's the next great challenge.